Okay, welcome everybody, both around the table and online. My name is Sue Conlon. Just by way of a brief introduction, I've been working in the immigration and asylum field for just over 36 years now. It's not an easy area of work because it keeps changing. I do some legal casework for an organisation in this building called Hope Projects, but my main work is now doing training. And some of that is directly with people who are particularly in the asylum system. I will stop occasionally for people to interpret. I know that those of you around the table have got a copy of the slides that I'm going to be speaking to. I don't know about those online, although I believe interpreters have got them. We'll get some more slides in a minute. It's a copy for yourself. What we're looking at today is preparing for and taking part in asylum interviews. I'm going to be putting these slides on the screen. Interpreters have a copy in front of them as well. I'm not necessarily going to read everything that I've typed. That might take too long. Okay. So what I'm just doing now for those around the table, more than for those on screen, is to put the slides up. I'm also going to get rid of my own video. Now, I know that some of you, quite a lot of you, have already had 2 interviews with the Home Office, the very first screening interview and also an asylum interview. But even though you've had them, hopefully this information will be useful to you, things that you need to review. So returning from the first page to the second page, if you want to follow it. There's actually 2 interviews in the Home Office asylum process. That's 2 interviews if the Home Office agrees to consider your asylum application in the UK, which I assume is the case with all of you. The first one is a screening interview. That's part of registration. It might take place as soon as you've given your fingerprints and your photographs have been taken. That's the screening interview. And that's followed by a main asylum interview. Any interview you have should be conducted in a language that you are fluent in. If they use an interpreter that you don't fully understand and they want to go ahead with the interview, you can ask them to make a note on the interview record that you don't completely understand the interpreter. Now, both these interviews are important, and you should make sure that you've got a copy of both interview records if you've had two. If you've just had the first one, which is called an initial contact and asylum registration questionnaire, you should get that if you haven't yet had your full interview. You either need to read those interviews through yourself, if you can read in English, or ask someone to read them through to you, so you know what's said in case there's something that's wrong or been missed out. There's a document as well called a preliminary information questionnaire, which has just got the initials PIQ, which may well be given to you after a screening interview, and you're told to complete it and return it to the Home Office by a date that they will write on that form. We're going to, sorry. We've got a session tomorrow when we're looking at the PIQ, so I'm not going to say much more about that today. We're going to look, apologies. We're going to look first of all at screening interviews. It's a page that starts purpose of a screening interview. Now, as I've already said, that screening interview often takes place the same day that you've registered your asylum claim, but it might be on a different day. The difference between a screening interview and a main asylum interview is that we know what the questions are in the screening interview because they're typed out, ready to read to you. Now, at the start of that screening interview, there's a statement that they should read to you. And I'm going to read it. It's typed out in front of you. The officer is going to ask you some questions about your identity, family, background, travel history, and some health and welfare questions. The next bit is important. The officer will only ask you for a brief outline of why you are claiming asylum today. I should have said there will be time for questions, okay? I'll take a break every now and again, and you can ask any questions that you want. This first interview, the screening interview, should be short. Shouldn't last more than about 30 minutes. And they do this interview to take information about you, how and when you arrived in the UK, decide if your claim will be considered in the UK, and compare information in it to anything else you say or other information they may have about you. Now going on to look at what screening interview questions are. So we're looking at part one. We're going to look at part one, the personal details, which is the next page. If you've got the notes in front of you, you see the full list of all the sections of the questionnaire. It starts with name, has things like language spoken, occupation, family members. Now, nationality, the final sentence on the sheet, that's the most important one because that's the starting point for considering anybody's asylum claim. Which country are you from? For most people, that is straightforward, but sometimes the Home Office do dispute nationality. We're now going on to part two of the screening interview, which is about health and special needs. Can you keep an eye on questions? But Gullah, you want to ask a question? Want to unmute your microphone?
Yes, if it's possible. Hi, everybody. Hi, Sue. It's very nice to see you again. So
what I do, Gullah, is I'll repeat your question for people in the room. So if you break it down sentence by sentence, okay, carry on.
Okay. So when somebody did a screening interview, how far they can fix the information. For example, if somebody did mistake, or by interpreting the date of birth or nationality, like how far the person can fix it.
The question is, if you make a mistake or if someone else has made a mistake in the screening interview, when can you correct that? How far do you have to wait, or how, is it too late sometimes? You can correct any mistake at any time, preferably as soon as you become aware of the mistake. Try and put it on record that a mistake has been made and explain how it is you came to know about it. This section on health asks for information about physical or mental health, about you and any other family member who is with you. If you have a disability, if you're physically well but you've got a disability, then give them information about that. This section also asks if you've ever been exploited. For example, if you've been made to work or if you've been forced to do anything that's a criminal offence. And this can have happened in your country, it could have happened on the journey, or it could have happened after you've arrived in the UK. Now, whether or not you would say you've been exploited, if you have been badly treated at any point, particularly in the journey, perhaps by the people smugglers or other people that you've met, say something about that in answer to this question. If you have experienced any form of exploitation, which is sometimes called trafficking, the Home Office might ask you if you would agree to be referred to a special unit for that to be considered separate to your asylum claim. Now, both this section and also the PIQ also ask what level of education you have had. It's not a question that really matters for your asylum claim, but obviously you have to answer it in some way. It's probably more important that if you've had a limited education or no education, that's probably more important for them to know that than if you've had, for example, university education, because that affects your ability to talk about things or to know things. I'm now going to go on to part 3, which is about travel and what we call third country. In other words, not your country, not the United Kingdom, but any country you might have been in between your country and here. Now, although this is about travel, the first question is, why have you come to the UK? Not how, but why? Now, just remember, the Home Office will use fingerprints and other information such as visa applications to check what you're saying in this interview with other documents that they have. Now, that first question is followed by questions about whether you've been fingerprinted in any country. The route that you took to come to the UK might not have been direct, it might have been across various countries. And questions about what transport you used, and that could be different. It could be car, lorry, boat, walking. It could be different forms of transport at different times of the journey. They will also ask whether you've claimed asylum in any other country and what you said when you arrived in the UK. Always remember that whatever you say in one interview will be compared to what you say in another interview and in your questionnaire. So we've got another slide where I give you a little bit more information about traveling through other countries. If you traveled through other countries, particularly through other European countries, Italy and France, for example, it's important to say why you didn't stay there, or if you claimed asylum there, what happened. Now, there are different reasons why you might have moved on from a country. It might be that people that you were with, people you knew, were traveling to another country, so you went with them. Or it might be you weren't treated well there, or it wasn't safe. That might be another reason why you moved on. And it might also be you had no idea what asylum was. You might not have even known it when you arrived in this country. So how could you claim something when you don't even know about it? Whatever the reason, if you have been in other countries, whatever the reason that you've been in different countries, try to help the interviewing officer understand it wasn't that when you left your country, you planned the whole thing. Decisions were made on the way. It's not a continuous journey. I'll give you an example in a minute. For example, if you are in Eritrea, you get to Sudan, you go from Sudan to Libya, you go from Libya to Italy, you go from Italy to France, and then France to the UK. It's not like you planned when you left Eritrea, that whole journey. It's not a holiday. If you are under the control of someone at any part of your journey, it's important that you explain that. You weren't free to choose. Part 4 is what they call the basis of your asylum claim. Why are you claiming asylum? And at the start of that section, they should read to you the sentence, please briefly explain all of the reasons why you cannot return to your home country. Difficult for me to know how you're brief, but also explain all of it. So I'll try and give you an idea. Just give one line about why you left. For example, you were forced into a marriage which wasn't good for you and you had to leave, but there might have been other reasons. Your own family might have been against what you were doing. Try and just say something briefly about each of these without missing any reason out why you left. One of the questions they might ask you in this section is, when did this happen? In this country, we're obsessed with dates. You may be from a country that uses a different calendar to the one that we use here. Never guess at a date. Don't be forced into giving a date if you don't know it. It might be that you have a memory that doesn't use dates. It might be that you would say, well, this happened when my oldest son was 2 years old. So that's giving some information without trying to fix the date, although they might then expect you to know your son's date of birth. This section also asks you for your next interview, would you be more comfortable with a male interviewing officer and interpreter or a female? And sorry, say that first. If there are things that you wouldn't say in front of a man, then say you want a woman interpreter, a woman interviewing officer. And if you get to your main interview and it's not a woman officer and it's not a woman interpreter, you can repeat, I'm sorry, I have to have a woman interviewing officer and a woman interpreter. Sometimes people are more comfortable, are okay if the interpreter's female, even if the officer is male, because it's the interpreter that you're talking more with. So just decide what's right for you. Part 5 asks you some strange questions. For example, whether you've ever been accused of or committed an offence, or whether you've ever been involved with armed or violent organisation, group or party. Some people can be at risk if they go back, but if they've done something wrong themselves, they can't necessarily get accepted as a refugee. On these slides, when we come to the section about asylum interviews, there's advice about answering any question. Okay, we'll come to that. Okay. Part 6 may not be asked. They'll only ask this question if they think they might actually detain you rather than give you what we call bail. But they don't always ask that question, and they should give nearly everybody bail. If they do say, can you tell me why you shouldn't be detained, particularly mention health, family, medication that you're taking, those things are important to say. And finally, part 7, you get the declaration, the part of the questionnaire, of the screening interview that you're asked to sign. One of the questions there is, have you understood all the questions? Until you see a copy of those interview notes, you won't know if you've really understood all the questions or if they have really understood you. So what you could say is, I think so. I think I've understood. They also ask in this section, is there anything you would like to add or change to your response, to your answers? You don't know what they've written. You don't know if the interpreter has been correct. So you could simply answer, I don't think so, meaning I don't think there's anything I want to change. Before they ask you to sign, they should say to you, this is the final part of this slide, your signature below also confirms that you have understood all of the questions asked and received a copy of this interview. Even if you've signed to say you understand, if you later realize something is wrong, try and get that corrected as soon as you can. I'm going to just stop there before we come on to asylum interview. So stop the sharing in case there are any questions, either from those who are online or from anybody in this room. Lorraine, I see you've put a question in the chat box. Is screening still at Croydon only? Is that your question? To the best of my knowledge, yes, but I must admit I haven't actually checked because obviously during lockdown they made it local, but as far as I know, it's gone back to Croydon. You've got one here as well. Sarah wants to ask a question. I'll come to you in a minute. Okay, is that fairly recent? Apparently some people have been interviewed in Solihull. How recent was that? Just finding out when someone was interviewed in. Okay, some people are still being interviewed in Solihull, so not necessarily just Croydon.
Okay.
You had a question?
Yeah, it's a different one.
Just hold on one moment. If you're online, just one moment. We got one question from within the room. Yep. Yep. We're coming to that. We're coming to it. Got a section on delay in claiming asylum. Not that I can give you all the answers, but we can at least look at that, okay? Did you have a question? Were you okay? Have a question? No? No? Lorraine, you got your hand up again. Is this from before or do you have another question? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, it's another question. I wanted to ask about how long does it take between the screening interview and the big interview? Do we have like a time limit? Because some people, they say, oh, I only did screening. I haven't been for my interview. And then it takes ages before, like, I think I know of someone who said it was like around 3 years. He said since he claimed asylum, he was never called for interview.
I'll just repeat that question just a minute. Lorraine has asked, how long is it between the screening interview and the main asylum interview? Because she knows someone who's been waiting 3 years. It's not a fixed time. It's not a fixed time between the screening and the main asylum interview. One of the things the Home Office has to decide after the screening interview is whether they're going to even consider your asylum claim here in the UK, especially if you've been in other European countries. That can mean a delay of at least 6 months. Rana, you had a question?
Yeah. How long is
So the question here is not about the gap between the interviews, but how long after the interviews before a decision? There is no fixed time. I have an appeal on Tuesday for somebody from India who had his interviews were finished in February 2021. He had his decision in October 2022. I'm sorry. Mm. Before you sign? The question is, if you're being told in the declaration that you're signing to say that what you've understood all the questions and that you've been given a copy of the interview, does that mean that at that interview you are allowed, with the interpreter's help, to go through the questions and the answers so that you know what is written? The answer is no. And I'm going to ask whether your experience was different. Someone had an interview in June. I'm just finding out whether it was read back to you. Just waiting for the answer then to be interpreted.
Mo wà lórí Zoom ni. Ó yẹ wù mí tí wá.
We're still here, folks. So just wait. Okay. Yes, at the end, did the interpreter go through them with the officer at the end to read every question and every answer? Not was the interpreter there, but did the interpreter read everything back so that you could confirm it was true? Still waiting for the answer to that question. Okay, so it seems that there was some readback, but it was difficult because the interpreter was trying to repeat what the officer was saying. If you can, if you want, refuse to sign, but that's easy for me to say and hard for you to do that when you're sitting there dependent upon them. But you could say, I can't sign that because you haven't read it to me and I'm not sure it's correct. But it takes a very confident person to do that with a Home Office when you're by yourself. There's two questions in the chat box. The first one, Lorraine, about 2 tiers of asylum. It's too technical. I am not doing that today. It doesn't really need to be done today. There's another question saying it's been 3 years since I came to the UK, having a substantive and main interview tomorrow. How long would I be waiting to hear the decision from the Home Office? Would I wait 3 years more? It's not. That's the question. Am I going to have to wait another 3 years, having waited 3 already? It's not possible for me to say that, but hopefully not. Because you've waited so long already, hopefully they're ready to make the decision. I just want to ask a question. Those of you who've had your screening interview, do any of you not have a copy of it? Okay, so everybody here in the room seems to have it. Have you read? No? Got it? You still don't have it? The solicitors? Okay. And so one person hasn't personally got a copy because it's been given to the solicitors. Did your solicitors go through that interview record with you? This applies to anybody. If you have a solicitor, did they go through that interview record with you? Thank you, Tammy. I see you've got a copy. Yeah. Okay, so someone said that there was an error in the surgery's name, and they asked the solicitor to correct it, who said that they would, just to say that should get a copy of the letter or the email the solicitor sends so that you know that they've done it. I'm going to move on to asylum interviews because some of these questions will come up again. One more question or statement? Okay, just briefly. Solicitors act for you and they should act in your best interests. If the solicitor, and I know Sarah struggles with this with solicitors, if they are not giving you something that you're asking for, if they're not meeting with you to give you advice, information about interviews or statements or the preliminary information questionnaire, you have to think about putting something in writing to them to say, I've asked you before for this. Please give me a copy of this and please give it to me within the next 1 week. And if you don't, unfortunately, I will have to make a complaint. They have to take the word, or should take the word complaint seriously, because they have to register those with the Law Society. I think maybe, Sarah, a session on what to expect and how to work with solicitors or legal reps might be useful. I'm going to come on to asylum interviews because there's quite a bit to go through. So these main asylum interviews, sometimes called a substantive interview. We could carry on. We could perhaps have a discussion after if it's still some. Yeah, we'll maybe could talk about that, but let's press on. Okay. Asylum interviews follow the registration of the claim, the fingerprinting, the screening interview, and the Home Office getting any reports they might have about you, visa applications, and the preliminary information questionnaire being submitted, and anything else you've sent them. So they've got all of that. Interviewing officers are told to read everything through that they've got before they start your main interview, and also to look about what's happening in the country, read country reports as well. Just remember that what you say in the asylum interview is going to be compared to what you've said before, or what you've submitted, or any other information they have about you or about your country. They're going to compare it. I'm going to summarize the page that's called practicalities. You get a letter inviting you to an interview. They tell you where to go and what time to go, and that you should take your letter and your identity document with you. Interviews very rarely start on time, so be prepared for a wait. If you are going, for example, to Solihull, it's a very busy Home Office building because people are going to report. Some people there for interviews, some people there for reporting. Okay, so just be prepared for the fact it might also be busy or noisy. The officer who does the interview with you might be there physically in the room, or you might be put in front of a screen like a laptop, and they're in a different building completely, and so is the interpreter. Now, the Home Office have said they want to clear the backlog of asylum claims by the end of this year. In other words, the next 3 months. They want to make decisions on all the claims in 3 months. That's what they've said. And that's what they've said. And for that reason, they've said asylum interviews should only be about 45 minutes. I'm not sure I believe that. Okay. If you have children, try to make arrangements for someone to look after them, because there's no facilities, childcare facilities at the Home Office. And of course, it can be very distracting. If you are taking any tablets or you've got some sort of medication, take that with you so you can show to the officer what treatment you are receiving. If you have any documents that confirm who you are, that you've not already submitted or can prove anything that you're saying, then take that with you, but it's not essential because you get a chance to do that later. Can I just add this? If you have your interview and there's a long wait, even if it's a month, 2 months, and something else happens that's important, make sure that gets submitted to the Home Office because they have to take that into account. There might be something in your country, like an election, or it might be something that's to you personally. Add that information in. You don't just stick to what you've said in the interview. I'm going to summarize what Home Office interviewing officers are told about how to conduct interviews. I will read just part of it though. One of the things they're told, and this is the third paragraph down, ensure that all asylum claimants are treated with respect, dignity, and fairness, regardless of their age, disability, ethnicity, nationality, race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, or belief. Treat them with respect, dignity, and fairness. That's what they're told. If you don't feel that in your interview you've been treated properly, try, if you can, to make sure that goes in writing to the Home Office, because otherwise they might have recorded something that isn't right and they're going to use it against you. So try and talk to your solicitor if you have one, or a friend, someone from Baobab, and just say, look, this is what happened. I don't think that was right. And therefore try and get that information in writing to them. Yeah. That page about guidance to caseworkers on documents already submitted, all I'm just reminding you is that if anything is already on record, they're going to compare what you say to what the information they've already got. If, for example, preliminary information questionnaire has been submitted and you don't know what's in it, then when you're asked at the start of the interview, is the information correct? You can say, I don't know. Or if it's not correct, you can say, no, it's not correct. My solicitor made a mistake. You need to have that on record. You may be, just 1 minute. Yeah. We may be told that your interview is going to be by video. And for some people, they don't like that. They don't like just looking at a screen, seeing themselves, seeing the officer. There is guidance where you can say, I'm sorry, but a video interview is not correct. And that slide there just repeats some of the guidance where you can ask, please, no, not a video. Just got one question here.
Solicitor, is the solicitor part of the process of completing the preliminary information questionnaire, or is that for the seat myself?
If there is a solicitor, it is their responsibility to put forward any information in relation to the claim, including the preliminary information questionnaire. But I would just add, I personally don't complete the questionnaire because I do everything separate. You'll see that tomorrow if you're here, why I don't use that. Coming to the page that says opening comments or questions. These are typed into the interview record and should be read to you at the beginning of the interview. And I'm going to read them through. I think you've got a slightly different version. You've got the draft version of the slides. You might want to look after you. It's opening questions, that one. Yeah. They'll say to you, if you do not understand a question, please tell me and I will clarify or rephrase it. That's any question at any time in the interview. Just listen to this. They say to you, this interview is your opportunity to tell us your reasons for claiming asylum. It's your opportunity. They also say, if you want to take a break during the interview, please let me know. And I may also suggest a break if I think that we need to take one. I know that one of the things, if you've waited a long time for the interview, you just want it to be done, you want it to be over, so you can move on to the decision. But sometimes you need to say, I can't continue, or I need to take a break. You need to stop things, and that we come back to that in a bit. I'm not going to read all of these because of time. You will be asked, do you understand the interpreter? Now you ask that at the beginning of the interview, and you might feel it's fine. No problem with the interpreting at the moment. But if you have problems later on with the interpreter, then you need to say, excuse me, I think there's a problem. It's not just a question for the beginning, it's a question for you to bear in mind throughout the interview. Sorry for those looking online, I keep jumping on. There's also another question. Are you feeling well and happy to be interviewed today? Again, you might be well at the beginning, but feel unwell later on. And you need to say to the officer, I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well anymore. I want to say something about Home Office interpreters. It's the next page. There's a statement that is read by the officer to the Home Office interpreter at the beginning. It's there on the page. I'm not going to read it today. In my experience, it's Home Office interpreters rather than the interviewing officers who present the greatest challenge and the biggest problems in an interview. If you suggest they're not understanding you, or if you're suggesting they're not repeating properly back in English what you've said to them, they sometimes take offense. And what I say at the end is this, just remember that they've told you this interview is your opportunity to tell us your reasons for claiming asylum. So I'm saying to you, don't let the interpreter or the officer take that opportunity away from you. And we've got a question from within the room. So I'll take the question, then I'll repeat it.
Does it have to be a home office interpreter, or can someone seek a bring along independently?
Okay, so the question is, does it have to be the Home Office interpreter, or can the asylum seeker bring their own interpreter who they're familiar with to the interview? That's the question. The answer is it has to be the Home Office who choose the interpreter. But particularly if you've got a solicitor, they could arrange for your own interpreter to go with you in order to check that what's being said is correct, and they can then make a record of it. That's more likely to be done if the solicitor's going as well, which is unusual. No legal aid. Going to look at the page called Advice on Answering Questions. This is any question asked at any time, any interview, any appeal hearing. This is the advice I would give you. The first advice is make sure that you have understood the question properly. Make sure you know what they're asking you. If you're not sure what the question is asking, then ask for it to be repeated or rephrased. They tell you that at the start of the interview, but that's what you must do. Make sure it's put in a way that you can understand it. Don't start to answer a question before you're clear what you're being asked about. Never guess at what you think the answer is. If you don't know the answer, then say something like, I don't know, or I can't remember. I'll give you, well, what I would say to you is don't let them bully you. They might say, for example, come on, this thing that happened to you is so important, you must remember this information. And you can say, I can't at the moment. When you've understood the question, answer that question as directly as you can. I will give you an example in a minute. Simple example. Okay, just 1 minute. If I ask you what your name is, I want you to tell me your name. I don't want your date of birth. I don't want your nationality. I don't want your address. Whatever the question is, you answer it directly. If they want to know something else, they'll ask you another question. We've got a question from within the room. Okay, so the question is, if you do know the answer, but you're struggling to answer it because it's, for example, making you feel very sad, do they force you to answer the question? Remember the guidance they are given about fairness and dignity and respect. And that's particularly for people that have gone through sexual abuse, rape, domestic abuse. You can say, look, I can't do this. I can't do this. They should never force you to answer a question. They should write down on the record, you can't do this. You can't talk about it. I'll give you an example in a minute. I was once in an interview with a man from Iran who'd been tortured. When they started to ask him fairly simple questions, he had a panic attack and he couldn't speak. They tried twice to interview him, and both times the same problem happened. They never did an interview with that man. They accepted a statement done by his solicitor instead. No interview. There is guidance on when they will not conduct an interview. It's very rare. There are circumstances where they won't force an interview. If there is something in your interview you don't want to talk about, tell the officer you'll get some information to them as soon as possible once you're comfortable to talk about it with somebody else. The last piece of advice on answering questions is if you think you might have made a mistake or that you've not been asked something that's important, at the end of the interview you're asked, is there anything that you want to like to add or amend? And you can say it then. I think probably the question you would ask me is, could you tell me what they're going to ask me? I can't tell you what they're going to ask you. The questions are specific to each individual case. But there are some things that are likely to occur in any interview. So we're going to go through some of those now. It depends which country you're from. It depends what your journey has been, whether you have any proof of nationality. That will depend on the questions. The questions depend on that. So what are the questions you might be asked if you don't have any evidence about your identity or nationality in particular? There are certain countries where you're more likely to get asylum than others. Okay? Eritrea, Sudan, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, Libya. Okay? If you claim to be a citizen of one of those countries, but you don't have any proof, they're going to ask you questions about that country to see whether or not you are actually. This applies to Iraq and Iran as well. Okay? They're going to ask you questions about the country. I'm not suggesting that you learn information if you don't know it. Okay, I'm just alerting you to the fact there are certain typical questions they ask. They can ask you about the history of the country. When did it become independent? They might ask you about the geography, particularly of the area you lived in. Are there any rivers? Are there any mountains? Are there any famous landmarks? There are many reasons why you might not know the answer. Just remember, don't guess. Try and explain why you don't know. For example, you've never been to school. You only lived there as a child. Some reason why you don't know it. If I were to be asked questions about Birmingham, country I've lived in most of my life, there are things I'm not going to be able to answer. These are silly questions, but you may nevertheless be asked them. We come to this issue about the delay in claiming asylum. You may be asked why you claimed asylum when you'd already been in the UK for a long time, maybe as a visitor, a student, you've overstayed a visa, or you've come as a wife. You may be asked, why are you claiming asylum now? Think about how it is that you even found out what asylum is and that asylum might apply to you. What did you learn, for example, from people that you knew, from family, from the mosque, from the church, for the area that you're living in? What did they tell you that made you think, maybe this is the right thing for me? Did you get any legal advice? If so, who did you get it from? When did you get it? What did they say? Just think, in your particular situation, were there any particular reasons why you didn't claim asylum before the date that you did? I'll give you an example of a man from Bangladesh who came as a visitor, although things weren't safe in Bangladesh. So he went to get advice from the community and advice from solicitors. The advice that he was given, the information that he was given was, if you claim asylum from Bangladesh, you will be refused and you will be sent back. He couldn't take that risk, so he did nothing for 5 years. He claimed asylum after he was arrested for working illegally. He explained why he hadn't claimed before, because of the advice he'd been given. I checked the statistics for how many Bangladeshis were granted asylum. Only 5% of Bangladeshis were granted asylum. The advice, the information he was given was correct. If he'd claimed, he would have been sent back. So he only claimed when he had no other choice because he'd been arrested. There are other people who don't claim asylum, perhaps after they've come on a visa, because they think something's going to change and it's going to be okay to go home. And they don't claim initially for that reason. There's all sorts of reasons. You've got to find your reasons. I can't tell you, I can't remember how many times I've said to a client and I've said to them, okay, you've claimed asylum. Can you tell me what asylum is about? And they can't answer the question. Let me say this as well. Nobody claims asylum unless there isn't any other choice. If you have another way of staying in the country, you don't go into the asylum system. Okay. Sarah, we're 5-2 at the moment. There's quite a lot still to go. We'll just press on, but I'll have to miss some of it out. I also haven't brought my charger, thinking it was only 2 hours, but we're okay for now. There are slides here that go through individual claims. You've got a slide here if your claim is based upon religion. What are they going to ask you? I'm not going to read those. I'm going to read the slides about if you're claiming on the basis of your religion. Going to look at the slide that says claims based on persecution as a woman, because this might apply to some of them. There is a case that went through the courts called Shah and Islam, 2 women from Pakistan. That case found, in their particular case, that just being women and the situation they were in, it was enough to put them at risk if they went back to Pakistan. So being a woman in some countries is enough sometimes to make you a second-class citizen and makes you're at risk of persecution, either because what you've done or what you've failed to do. You just haven't behaved the way they think you have. Think of women in Iran who aren't wearing a hijab. Okay? Just being a woman sometimes is enough with other things with it. Okay. Now, it might be in your situation that it's because you've rejected an arranged marriage and your family are against you for that reason. It might be that you were forced to marry and then possibly treated like a slave by your husband or his family. It might be that you've had children outside of marriage, and that's just not acceptable to your family or to your community. I have an appeal on Tuesday where part of the case is that there is a risk the children will be taken away from the husband and the wife by their families because they are not bringing the children up to be proper Hindus. It's quite likely that there's something about being a woman that makes your case a little bit more, puts you more at risk. Something. It might not be the main reason, but there might be another reason that you need to add into your case. I'm going to skip over slides about political activity and about being trafficked and read one about claims based on domestic abuse. Domestic abuse can take place within a family. It might be the father who's abusing the children, maybe physically beating them, even if there isn't sexual assault, or it might take place within a marriage. And that abuse within a marriage doesn't have to come from the husband. It can come from someone else. It could come from the mother-in-law, could come from the sister-in-law, could come from the brother-in-law. That's still abuse within the family. being a woman alone in some countries is enough to put you at risk. So they will ask you questions to find out whether you really are alone, or can you actually go back and live with your parents again, even though you've rejected the marriage they arranged for you. But they also may well ask you, did you get any help from the authorities? Did you go to the police? Did you go to any organization supporting women? If you didn't do that, if you didn't go to the police, they might ask you, well, why didn't you? Or if you did seek help, what happened? What did they say? It's in tomorrow's training about the preliminary information questionnaire, but I'll say it now. You know what your country is like. Okay, you know what will or won't happen if you go to the police. You know what they'll say. Go away. Nothing to do with us. You need to try and help the interviewing officer understand the reality of your country. Because if I go here to the police, they might well take a statement. They might register a criminal offence. They might investigate it. We are not in the United Kingdom. When you're claiming asylum, you're talking about a country they might not really understand. You have to help them understand it. Looking at the slide now that says claims based on sexual orientation or gender identity. There's some quotes on that page of what guidance that are given to the caseworkers if they're interviewing someone who claims, for example, they're a lesbian, or someone who claims that they're a man who's become a woman. There is guidance that they follow. One of the questions that women might be asked in this situation is, when did you realize? When did you realize you're a lesbian? They shouldn't really ask that. I have never in my life been asked, when did I realize I was heterosexual? Nobody asks that question. They shouldn't ask whether you're in a relationship. Well, they will ask if you're in a relationship at the moment, but not being in a relationship doesn't mean you're not heterosexual or you're not gay. I want to look at the slide about children. If you have children, the Home Office should take into account what will happen to them, not just to you, but what will happen to them if you are refused and told to return to your country. Your children may face problems of their own, regardless of what you face. For example, girls might be at risk of FGM. They may face problems because of your political activity. So the Indian case I have next week is that people threatened to rape his daughters because he was supporting Muslims in India. Your children may face problems. They may face problems of their own because you're not married to their father. How are children who were born outside of marriage treated in your country? They may face their own problems. If they don't ask about your children in the interview and there's something you need to say, then at the end, when they say, is there anything you want to add? You say, yes, I'm concerned about my daughter, about my son, and tell them what it is. Two things that you all need to bear in mind, wherever you're from, whatever your claim is about. The first is, did you ask for help in your country? Did you? Unless you are fearing the government itself, did you go to someone and say, I'm at risk, please help me? It's actually this slide at the bottom where I say most people know there's little that, for example, the police will do, even if you do seek help from them. If that's your experience, you need to try to find a way to help the Home Office understand the reality of the situation in your country. They're not going to listen to me. The slide on moving to another part of the country applies to a lot of people as well, whatever your claim is about. Even if the Home Office believe what you're saying, they believe everything, they may still refuse you because they think there's another part of the country you could have gone to instead of leaving. So you may be asked a question, were these problems just in the part of the country where you lived, or were the problems elsewhere as well? That's a question where they're trying to suggest you could have gone somewhere else. These problems only exist in the capital or in the east of the country. Go to the west, go to the south. That's what that question is about. So even if you've never lived in the west or the south or the capital, you need to have an answer to say, even if I went there, I would experience the same problem. Yeah. I'm now looking at the slide about problems during the interview. I'm going to summarize this. You might want the interview to go ahead and to be finished, so it's done. But there might be problems with the interpreter, or you might be unwell, or because the questions are upsetting you. You have got to weigh up, what's the greater disadvantage to me? If I say, I can't do this, please arrange another date, compared to going ahead and you not saying the things you need to say. You have to weigh it up and decide, do you want to press on with this, or do you want to do it another day? Yeah. There's a slide about, can anyone go with me to the interview? The answer is yes, they can, if it's agreed in advance. Someone can go and be there to support you. Can't be someone who's claiming asylum. Can't be a friend. It can't be a relative. Got to be somebody independent. Somebody, for example, from Baobab can get permission to attend there with you, just to give you support. Yeah. They can intervene if they think you're being pushed into answering a question. They can intervene and say, excuse me, I don't think that's appropriate. Otherwise, they have to keep quiet. But there are things that can be done by the person who's with you to try and make sure that things go as well as possible. When the interview comes to the end, if you're in the same room as the interviewing officer, he should give you a little USB stick on which he's printed his typed notes, and he's given you a copy of the audio recording. There's a microphone in the middle of the table that will have picked up what's being said, everything. Whenever you get that typed notes or the audio recording, if you've got a solicitor, they should read the notes and they should meet with you to give you advice so that you can correct anything that's wrong or give more information that you've not said. You might need to do that with a friend instead of with a solicitor. You may also have been told to submit some documents within a week of the interview. You need to try and do that if it's all possible. Get the documents submitted that you've talked about in the interview, or explain when you expect to have them and when you will send them. Any questions from anybody who's online? Yes. Okay. Yeah. The question is, they sometimes ask for evidence, but depending upon the country that you're from, there might not be possible to get any evidence. I'll just wait just a moment. Yeah.
5 years in the police station.
Yeah.
After 5 years, they just destroyed it. And somebody who has something.
Some countries it's not possible to get evidence. So what do? We'll deal with it tomorrow, but you try to either explain why you can't get it, or you show what you did to try to get it. You emailed a lawyer, you contacted the police. They didn't respond. You've got the evidence to show you tried. Okay, that's important. Your own words are the most important evidence you can have. That's why it's important that your words are properly written down and recorded in the information questionnaire or in a statement. That's the most important thing that matters. Then, if you can't get evidence, you explain why you can't get the evidence. You're welcome. You got a question as well? Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. Can I just ask others to be quiet just a moment, please? Hold on. Yeah. If someone's completed an asylum claim questionnaire issued to people from certain countries, the question is, will the interview be the same as what we've gone through, or will it be different? It should be much shorter. They should only focus on those things that they're still not sure they've got correct or enough information about, rather than going through all of this. But some of it might come up again. It just depends on the officer who's doing the interview. Are there any other questions from people in the room, or any questions from anybody online? No. Okay. I'm going to bring this video then to an end. I may see some of you tomorrow.